In trying to do this video on the Ten Commandments, I've had a very serious problem. The problem is that I like to be as genuine as possible, as true and correct to everyone as possible, at the same time through a single video. I know, but I'm trying anyway. I know I'm messing up left, right, and center, but I'm trying. And if we're going to do this, the Ten Commandments, which, I regard life as serious, and I regard the Ten Commandments as a serious thing connected with life. So, that's serious times serious, serious squared. So for me to be able to pull this off is literally impossible. So I figured that I have a solution. My solution is that the most recent person to subscribe, I believe both to YouTube and to Substack, because I got a subscriber on Substack who, I don't know, the person left their name, but didn't leave any way to get back in touch with them or to put them on the subscriber list. So if that's you, please get in touch. Let me know so I can put you on the subscriber list, and whatever else I can let you know about where to send the book that you wanted to send. But in any case, whether it's that person or someone else, the most recent comment on YouTube was by someone who said, I'm an atheist, but I very much enjoyed XYZ and subscribed. So I don't know if that person just subscribed on YouTube or if that's the individual who's I can't get in touch with who actually subscribed on Substack. In any case, my point being that I might have given the impression that I'm only speaking to religious people. That's not the case whatsoever. I am speaking to those unique individuals within all the tribes of the world. In every tribe on earth, there are very, very few individuals. What can I say? I'm speaking to them. But the language that I've been using has been very, very religious. So I think that in order for me to say these Ten Commandments in a way that I feel I'm being true to myself, while at the same time not taking it quite as literally and as seriously as I would if I were truly expressing myself without a video camera on me, then I can speak to this demographic, the demographic of people who are not religious, the demographic of people who are not anti-religious, because that's an entirely different thing, but who simply don't give a shit about religion, or to one degree or another, and who wouldn't mind that my video on the Ten Commandments includes that word, right? In other words, I'm speaking that language to that people. That's how I'm regarding right now what I'm saying. So I recognize that everyone else is here, but I'm gonna try to not be overwhelmed. I'm gonna try to take it as lightly as possible, so that I can do it, and also so that I can be speaking to this demographic that deserves to be spoken to, and from which I am a part, just as I'm a part of yours too. It's true, whether that makes sense or not. I'm among the religious and the anti-religious, and the irreligious, anything else, depending on the sentiment of what we're talking about. It doesn't come down to words. I have found that I can relate as a member of the tribe with people of all the tribes of earth that I've encountered so far. All right, so non-religious people, what are the Ten Commandments? Well, you've heard of them, right? Beyond that, why should you care? Why should you watch a series on the Ten Commandments? So, I don't know how much you happen to know about it. Presuming you're over the age of 23, which is the limited age that I would recommend in general for my videos, unless you're already married or unless you've been working for at least 2 years, in which case, really, you're an adult kind of at any age. But otherwise, for people who have entered the wider world, who are not completely under the control of parents and a school that is en loco parentis, So, the reason you should care is as follows. You've heard of the Jews, right? You might not know that the Jews are 1 out of every 600 people on earth. 1 out of every 600, that's it. 1 out of every 600 people. For every single Jewish person, there are 600 other people. Really, for every single Einstein and Feynman and Moses and Jesus, there are 600 other people. For every Freud and every Marx, there are 600 other people. So, you're familiar with the anti-Semitic theory, which is that the Jews all work together. Let me tell you, very unfortunately, they do not. Whether for themselves against the world or for themselves and whatever it is, they really don't work together. They really, really, really don't. The most intelligent anti-Semites who have done their research, who actually follow Jew stuff, they know this very well. Jews don't really get along with each other in a camaraderie, in a friendly way, sure, but not in a sort of help each other out and go out of your way to necessarily help the Jewish person over someone else. No, that's for a whole bunch of reasons that is not the case and has not been the case for at least as long as we know. Certainly among the more insular communities, there's more of that, but for them also, it's insular. It has to do with them. If you're a Jew who's not one of them, they don't care. It's just a simple communal thing. Just saying, community-wise, asabiya, it doesn't really, yeah. Anyways, so what is the deal? How is it possible? What is the story? Who are these people, these Jews? Where did they come from? Well, this being a very short introduction to the Ten Commandments, we can't really get into that. I have published, and if you subscribe to my ydydY.substack.com, you'll get my 15-hour series on exotic Jewish communities, which is just about like a quarter of the basic information that you need to know about where the Jews come from. But in very brief then, where the Jews come from, they come from these older people called the Jews, and before them and stuff like that, we kind of know where they come from. There's an unbroken chain, and they've been all over the place, all over the world. It's not like they've been hiding out behind the Sambatyon River in some magical, mythical area. We have records of them. They're actually the most literate people on earth. In fact, they're called, wherever they go, they're called the people of the book. Pretty astonishing stuff, and they've left records everywhere, everywhere. They're heavy on burial, and therefore you have their literal engraved into stone stuff. There's no dearth of evidence on the Jew thing. So, people might have some question like what percent descend from Khazars, or what percent came from here or from there, or which other people might descend from the ancient Jews or whatever. Sure, but the fact that like people who are a little too interested in the subject, end up questioning these things, and that's as far as they can logically go with their brains, indicates how much evidence there is for this extraordinary story of the Jews. Now, what's really weird is that this business about the Jews being a small nation, but yet known worldwide, and like God's chosen in some sense, as I've mentioned before, chosen isn't necessarily a great thing. Really, do you always want to be picked on by the teacher? It's not always necessarily fantastic. Chosen. Yeah, and there's evidence also from other religions, groups that really don't care for the Jews, the Christians and the Muslims, and the Mandeans and various peoples around the globe, all giving similar testimony to this Jewish people and some weird, extraordinary stuff about them, including this ancient document that they have. There's no story like that on Earth. You can find analogies with this, you can find analogies with that, little parts of the story, but the totality of it is just mind-blowing. I would love to read you Mark Twain's complete essay on the subject concerning the Jews. His complete essay is brilliant, but where at the end of it is something that I saw in the other 2 days ago. I saw a interview that Tucker Carlson just did with Vladimir Putin. And in the interview, Putin says, listen, every nation is the same. Every nation, the way that the world works is that certain nations rise, and then they fall. He gave Rome as the example. He said there's never anything else like Rome. Every nation, it rises and then it falls. It rises and then it falls, and it's gone from history. Yeah, Mark Twain finished his essay concerning the Jews, which, if you think it's going to be like fawning, it's definitely not. Mark Twain was an extraordinarily true, honest, unbelievable human being. And that essay is all over the place, including it'll include things that you will consider perhaps like the most anti-Semitic you can imagine anything being in an essay. But you'll also find among the most philo-Semitic, which is why you really have to judge people based on who they are in the totality of their context of life, not based on a few words here and there. And he was a good guy. I'm saying. Mark Twain was a good guy, a true guy. He was a great man. And he finishes off saying, like, what all these different nations, they all showed up and like made a big, and the Jews are like this small group that just wouldn't go away. They never took over the whole world. And yet whoever touches them ends up getting their religion somehow and kind of hating them for it. It's a very Freudian thing, hating the dad. It's obvious. The positive side of that Freudianism you see with Americans relating to British, because they already had the more recent rebellion, but they never quite could crush the Jews, kick the Jews out. It's very upsetting. So the smartest observers and the smartest observers of the Jews throughout the centuries, for thousands of years, all over the world have kind of, one way or another, and by now, we're not bothered by whatever their biases were, so we don't take their biases seriously, so it doesn't really affect us. But whatever we can read and easily understood, remove the garnish of the biases we know that they have, and they will say the same stuff about the Jews. All the same stuff that anybody really intelligent, again, ideally without any strong biases, one way or the other, regards as the Jews these days, people have been saying since forever. It's just crazy-ass stuff. This people of the book, about whom in the book, near the Ten Commandments here, it says, Lo meru bachem mikol ha'amim, choshak Hashem bachem vayivchar bachem, ki atem hama'at mikol ha'amim. Ki me'avas Hashem eschem, u'mishomroyes hashvu asher nishbal avoseichem. It's not because you are the largest of nations that God has cheshek, has a special love for you and chose you, because you're the smallest of the major nations, right? You look at any kind of religion graph, right? There's no group of people On the usual graph that shows, percentage in a pie chart or in a list, Jews are usually the smallest group, and yet they're pretty early on in the story. Like every group, every one of these books will make sure to explain the Jews before they explain the Christians or Muslims. It's kind of like the backstory to the whole business. Crazy stuff. So it's not because you're the biggest; you're in fact the smallest. But but because God loves you. I don't know what that means exactly. And because he's keeping the promise that he gave to your forefathers. Now, when was this written? When was that written? And the Ten Commandments, when was it written? So, I'm only going to give you information right now in this brief introduction, information that you can easily check up in the most basic of Wikipedia pages, and that's it's at least 2,000 years old. It's almost certainly, the people who, the book itself claims that it's older. The people who believe in the book over the years believe that it's older. But we actually have documents that no scientific community in the world disputes. No atheist community in the world disputes. We have physical documents that through carbon dating and other means, we know are over 2,000 years old that include these very words. And we know that they regarded it as ancient too. We even have a Greek translation from before that time. We know how far back it goes. We have solid evidence that nobody disputes. And that it goes back even further than these physical documents, referring to the ancient books of the Jews. So this is ancient stuff. If you watch the preamble, you'll know that I already went over time. So let me just say this about the Ten Commandments. Essentially, the 5 books of Moses, of which, like I said, we have copies that go back over 2,000 years. And at this point, I'm going to put a 2,000-year-old copy, again, not disputed, scientifically agreed upon, right there on the screen. So for those of you who can read Hebrew or just want to be inspired by it and perhaps want to follow along, you'll have it right there. So, these are the epochs of Jewish history in this book. The first epoch goes until the flood. The second epoch goes from the flood until the Jews going down to Egypt. And then the third epoch, because the whole Egypt thing is not even discussed really, the third epoch is when the Jews wake up to the fact that there is the possibility of freedom. When a pharaoh dies and the Jews moan, they come back to life again after hundreds of years of being bred as slaves. They come back to life briefly, and God says, "This is my moment." And God frees them. And that epoch up until this period right here, where God reveals himself all at once to the entire Jewish people, and reveals to them these aseres hadvorim, these 10 things, these 10 statements, these 10... See, unfortunately, translation is very, very, very difficult, especially because the Bible often speaks of God and uses words, when it comes to talking about God, uses words in different ways. Then it uses those same words. So to say that Aseret HaDvarim means these 10 things or these 10 words is not quite right. There's a divine quality to it, which is why some people translate it as 10 utterances, which sounds better. It gives it the, it's intended to be a moment. This thing is built up. This thing is straight away built up. Moses freeing the Jews. Moses was told at that point, when God hears the cry of the Jewish people when they briefly became alive with the possibility of freedom, with the recognition that they weren't animals, God goes to speak to Moses, who really did not want the job. Moses had some issues with both the Jews and the Egyptians, so he wasn't really sure that he was up for this. But God comes to Moses, and bear in mind, Moses is about 80 years old at this point. He'd been out of Egypt for probably about 65 years. That's, some people will claim it that we know, but in the Bible it doesn't seem like we really know 100%. 65 years or 60 years seems to be a reasonable amount to guess that he was outside of Egypt already and set up his whole life out there. In any case, so God comes to Moses and God says, "You're going to know that it's legit, that I'm the one who sent you, that you're actually speaking in the name of God himself, the God, the absolute truth, the absolute goodness, that which is beyond our ability to comprehend or to utter. You're going to say, you'll see, when you all come here, when you bring out this slave nation to this mountain right here, to Chorev, when you bring them out to Chorev," which is a fascinating word I can't really get into right now, but when you bring that nation here to worship me, then you will know that I'm the one who sent you. Then you will know absolute truth, because you're going to be part of an entire nation that will comprehend God face to face. Bear in mind, God keeps saying, remember, you didn't see anything. You didn't see any face. Don't forget, you didn't see any face. You comprehended me is what you did. You comprehended me. You didn't see any face. Moses has to keep telling them this business over and over again. No face, no face. Don't make a face. Really. But nonetheless, the expression in those days, as it is today, is face to face. God spoke to them face to face. They understood something about God face to face. Whatever that means, there are obviously no words in any language to describe it. That's what the book claims about itself. This thing that you're looking at on the screen right here, that's over 2,000 years old, this is what it is. In fact, the piece that you're looking at right there is from Deuteronomy, because originally this takes place in the second book of the 5 books of Moses, in Exodus. The books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are the 5. So this takes place in Exodus, or Shmois, Shmot, Shmoth. Very many different ways to pronounce it in any language. And then in Deuteronomy, when Moses is told by God, hey, you know what? You're not going to be able to be the one to take the Jews into Israel. So all the stuff you got to tell them, make sure you tell them right now. Moses gives them a few long speeches. And the essence of this speech right here is that the pivotal moment in your history as a nation, which you don't deserve, but God decided that because he loved your forefathers and loves you, and whatever that means, God decided that you're going to get these instructions, which, again, the instructions are all kinds of rules. Why is that a gift exactly? Right? So the Jews today, as the Jews then, as, we are basically people. We've never gotten way ahead of the rest of the world. It just hasn't happened. In some cases, maybe we drag the world a bit closer to us, but it just doesn't, we never got that much ahead. So even in that time, there was a lot of confusion as to what was going on there. But this was the essential moment. So Moses tells over this whole story about how it took place here in Deuteronomy, where he even goes so far as to say, and this is what's unbelievable, because like I said, the document you're looking at is about 2,000 years old, probably more, a little bit. And in the document, it claims itself to be telling an ancient story. And the document says, listen, I know that, I couldn't do this within a minute. The point is that the document says that if you're wondering in the future whether the story is true, ask yourself if any other people ever had such a foundation story. Ask of all the other peoples in the world, of all the other nations in the world, of all the other religions, did anybody else have a story that their original core group of people actually witnessed the revelation of God all at once? This querulous people who divided into multiple parts, who, they're a jumpy folk. They've had a rough history. They've been pretty traumatized. By this point, bear in mind, for a long time before that, they were kind of already more or less the most literate and intelligent people, and they were getting it from above and from below. And then they ended up as slaves for a long time. They were pretty traumatized folk. You got to give them some slack. And yet, nonetheless, they end up having a story that nobody else in the world has. Even though this story binds them to such difficult laws, so many rules, they believe in it. So this is pretty essential stuff to the whole Jew story. If you think any part of the Jew story is interesting, it's important to know the 10 Commandments. And I'll be reading for you here from Deuteronomy, because that's the version that is on your screen right there. It starts off with a small introduction, a few words, a few sentences, before Moses repeats the 10 Commandments. So, and for those of you who can read Hebrew, by the way, you might notice that a few letters are different. I can't fully address that right now. I would love to, but I can't fully address it right now. All that I'll say is, because a lot of people watching this are religious and might be concerned, let me say that it's more likely that in its majority, odds-wise, whatever, that our version will be more correct than their, just because you see the slight differences. It was likely written by people who were in the process, one way or another, of rebelling against Rome and all of society at that time. And it seems quite possible that there was one person reading from a Torah scroll, and everybody else, like 5 or 6 people around who were able to writing. They didn't have that much literacy in those days. It wasn't so easy to type as it is today, or to write as it is today. And therefore, you'll see a couple of small things. The only really interesting thing to me there, actually, that you'll see, is that with the 10 Commandments, the word lemor, instead of, which means to say, thus saying, to say, is connected with the 10 Commandments. Essentially, what I've been saying for a while is that the word lemor is our equivalent of quote. In other words, we would say quote, right? That's what lemor means. The next section is a quote. So it's weird when we translate it as to say, or, which is so archaic and doesn't really make sense to us. And over there, they put the word lemor exactly where you'd expect them to put it if it's a quote, which is different than the version that we have here. Just in terms of the way that it's written. The word is exactly the same. Every letter is the same. All right, I just need to reassure people. Because religious people get jumpy about this, right? If you're from some other society, I don't know what society you're from, skeptic guy, but whatever society you're from, I'm certain that I could find things that you'd find really, really jumpy about. So, cut me some slack here, even though I'm doing this for you, specifically. Okay. So, one thing I have to say here is with regards to God's name, because one of the 10 Commandments is not to take God's name in vain. So with regards to God's name, the 4-letter name of God, which is YHWH, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I have my reasons for what I'm doing. I'm going to be as legitimate as I can. And whatever I do, I do. I may not say it and just pause, or whatever. Anything's possible, but you will know that I am saying that I'm saying that. Whatever I mean by it, I mean by it, and that's it. So, Vayikra Moshe el Kol Yisrael, and Moshe called all of Israel. Vayomer Aleihim, and he said to them, Shema Yisrael, pay attention, Israel. Es hachukim ve'es hamishpatim, to these engraved laws and these judgments. Asher anochi dover baznechem, that I am speaking into your ears, hayom, today. Ulamadatem osam, and you should study them. Ushmartem la'asosam, and you should safeguard them in order to do them. Yehovah Eloheinu, korasimanu bris bechorev. Yehovah, our Elohim, which means our deciding factor. Elohim is best understood. The decider, the one who makes the stuff happen. The rules, but all of them. That's why it's in plural. Really, of course, it's just one Elohim. That's this, you know. But that's what Elohim means. So Yehovah Eloheinu. Eloheinu just means our Elohim. And it's odd for me often to translate it as God when I know it doesn't mean most of the conceptions that people have today of the word God. Anyways, for all my concern about not saying it in vain, Yehovah Eloheinu karasimanu bris bechorev. Yehovah Eloheinu cut together with us a covenant in Chorev. Lo es avosenu karas Yehovah es habris hazos. It wasn't with our forefathers that Yehovah cut this covenant. Ki itanu, but with us, anachnu, us, because Moses is saying this at the end of his life, 40 years after the event. In other words, the event happened according to the historical understanding, which is not the universally understood. My calculation, this event is claimed to have occurred 3,501 years ago. 3,501 years ago. And this would be 40 years after that. So what I'm reading to you now is claimed to have been literally spoken, although possibly in a different language, to be honest, because it does seem that the Jews general spoke Aramaic, but then again, it's likely that Moses would have been speaking in the pure Hebrew. Whatever, not my concern at this point. But these words were said to have been spoken 3,461 years ago. So Moses is saying, after 40 years, because bear in mind, at this point, most of the generation that had witnessed it themselves died. So Moses says, Lo es avosenu koras Yehovah es habris hazos. Right? It's very likely that Moses is standing there on the stage with the people who are still alive. There's Joshua and there's Caleb who are still alive, we know from that time period. And as well, there are all the people who were under 20, 40 years prior. All the people who were still young, they're still alive too. So it's likely that Moses is standing there with all these people before the very next generation and the generation after that, 40 years later. So, Lo es avosenu karas Yehovah es habris hazos. It isn't with our forefathers that Yehovah cut this covenant. Ki itanu, but with us, anachnu, we, us, Ele, these, po, here, hayom, today, kulanu chayim, we're all alive. Right? This is really sketching out something which, you know, as people make the argument that it's hard to convince people that never had this book that this book is true. Okay, you could convince people that some of the details of an earlier version you could possibly update, etc. But the vividness of the story, and anyways, it's pretty wild, right? Ki itanu, us, itanu, with us, literally. Ki itanu, but with us, anachnu, us, ele, these, po, here, hayom, today, kulanu chayim, all of us are still alive, you're looking at us. This isn't a story. You're listening to. He likely had them all standing there as witnesses, as testimony, according to a reading of the book. I'm not saying anything religious here, and it could be that it's not true, whatever. I'm not getting into that at this point, because especially, okay. Panim b'fanim, face to face. Diber Yehovah imochem. Yehovah spoke with you. Bahar, in the mountain. Mitocha eish, from within the fire. The story is unbelievably dramatic. If you want to read the original. Unbelievably dramatic. There are some, archaeologists and anthropologists today who believe that the Jews worshipped a volcano god. Really? A volcano god? Really? How can they possibly claim to be even remote? Don't get me wrong, it seems likely enough that Sinai might have been a volcano. It does come across pretty volcanic. It's possible that it was a volcano, but it's not a volcano god. It's not a volcano god. They worship the god who did the volcano stuff, and who split the sea, and who did the 10 plagues. There's in other words, the whole point of this whole story was God showing there's just one it's all following one single rule of nature, one fact of reality, one fact. It's all connected. There are no two reshuyos. There's no different realms of responsibility. It all comes down to one. And therefore, I can do volcanoes, I can do earthquakes, right? With Korach, he had the earth split open. I can split the sea. I got the water, I got the life, I got the animals, right? It shows one after the other. The lice even, right? I'm in charge of this business. It all comes down to one. And repeatedly here, Moses keeps saying, not in the part that I'm reading you right now, because, this is just a brief introduction, but Moses repeatedly says, ask for yourself. He says, Kisha'alna, because please ask. Liyomim Rishonim, to the earliest days. Lemin hayom asher bara Elohim adam ala oretz umektzei hashamayim meketzei hashamayim. From the day that God created the atom, the earthling on the earth, and from one end of the heavens to the other, ask everywhere and every time. Hanihiyah kedavor gadol hazeh. Has there been such a great thing? Oy hanishma kamoihu. Or has anybody even claiming that there was such a thing? Hashama om kol Elohim medaber mitoch ha'esh kasher shamato ato vayechi. Has a nation heard the voice of the Elohim speaking from within the fire, like you have heard and lived? Oh, or Hanisa Elohim lavo lakachas legoy mikerev goy b'masais ba'oises b'moivsim b'milchama b'zorin etuya. I don't want to get words wrong, so I'll stop right there. Has any Elohim tried to go and take one nation out, one nation entirely enslaved and owned by another, with such extraordinary miracles and wonders like you yourself have seen? You've been shown to know that there's nothing but him. That's what it says. Ein od movado. There's nothing but it, him. It's so silly. We don't have words. What are you going to do? We got to use the words we have. All right? So it's masculine, and there is no, it's not even a him, it's not a person. What is, you've been, so ein od movado, there's nothing but him. And then later, it actually says, ein od, there's nothing else. Because ein od movado means, yeah, he's the only one, but there's space for other stuff. He's just the only God, I guess. But there's other stuff. There's phones, and there's light, and there's thoughts, and there's me, and there's you. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. Ein od. There is nothing but. You see how it's hard to explain this stuff, how to understand this stuff. Yeah, so, Anochi Omed, I stood, Ben Yehoah uvenechem, between Yehoah and you, Ba'esahi in that time, Lahagid lachem, es dvar Yehoah, to tell you the word of Yehoah, Ki yiresem mipnei ha'esh, because you were afraid of the fire, Velo alisem bahar, and you did not go up the mountain, Lamar, saying, or again, quote, Lamar, quote. We're now at the bottom of the first column right there. Starts on the right, by the way, Hebrew, from rightest column to the left. So here you have something interesting. Here you have an easy get out of believing in God free card, because it repeats over and over again that the Jews were all there and God spoke to you face to face and you heard him yourself speaking out of the fire. And then it claims that Moses says, he says it all over the place. The whole story is told in Exodus. It's told here before the Ten Commandments and right after the Ten Commandments, that I'm the one who conveyed it to you. Seemingly, there are, of course, a gazillion answers by everything from people who want to believe it's not true to people who want to believe it is true. But the plain meaning of the text is pretty easy. The simple meaning of the text is really easy. And that is that what we call the first of the 10 commandments, the 10 things. See, this is why it gets complicated, because which 10 things do I read? From here or from Exodus? There's another way to read 10 commandments, something else completely. In this section over here in Deuteronomy, what's considered the 10th commandment in Exodus is broken up seemingly into two parts. So that's why it's not really commandments, it's statements. The very first statement is spoken of in the first person. The very first statement is God saying, "Hi, I'm God." That's the very first statement. God saying, "Hi, I'm God." Then the part that Moses says is the next 9. Or if you want to count it differently, God said the first 2 and Moses said the next 8. Again, I have a reason for the way I'm doing it. like I just said a moment ago. So the first one is a statement that is spoken of literally by God speaking in the first person about himself, saying me, I. And the rest of them are someone saying it about God, seemingly Moses, exactly like it claims to be, Moses saying, hey, him, referring to God in the third person. So that appears to be what happened. It does appear very clearly to be speaking of a theophany, if you will, a revelation, totally overtaking you like, oh my, this is it. And everybody agreed. Everyone had that same mystical experience at the same time. That same completely overwhelming mystical experience, the same kind at the same time. That's what cemented. That's what created Judaism. Before this, there were Jews, and there were things remembered and things that were, difference between Abraham and later on in Egypt, of course. But at this point, that's when Judaism begins. The theophany. That'll be the next video.